and a very warm welcome to Bharata First. I'm Frank Rausen Pereira. You're watching Big Picture. And since you're here, I would like to thank you for your continued support. For those of you who haven't already subscribed, please like the video, subscribe, hit the bell icon, and then all notifications. Do follow our social media handles for all the latest updates, and you can also subscribe to our newsletter to get some incisive content. The Bharata First team runs a daily Big Picture quiz. Please do participate by going through the description in Big Picture videos. Here are the UPI IDs for those of you who would like to come forward and contribute. A small contribution that you make will be a giant leap for us to keep bringing you this content. So do continue to show your love and support. All the information is in the description of the video. There are some recommendations as well that you must go through. So please go through the description. Now on to the discussion. US Secretary of State Antony Blinken on Friday said that the United States and India are united in trying to tackle the COVID-19 pandemic together, and Washington is determined to help India with its coronavirus crisis. India's Foreign Minister S. Jaishankar, who spent the past week in the United States seeking help amid a devastating second wave of infections at home, told reporters while standing with Blinken at a State Department meeting that India is grateful to Washington for strong support and solidarity. In the earlier days of COVID, India was there for the United States, something we will never forget, Blinken said. And now we want to make sure that we are there for India as well. Blinken also added that the partnership between the two countries is vital, strong, and increasingly productive. US-India ties have grown closer in recent years amid shared concerns about China's rise, and they have increased cooperation through the Quad. In this edition of Big Picture, we will analyze the Foreign Minister's visit to the United States. Joining me on the program today are Preeti Upala, geopolitical expert and foreign affairs editor of The Observer, California; Harshvi Pant, head strategic studies, Observer Research Foundation; and Dilip Sinha, former ambassador. Ambassador, let me start the program with you first. Let's first try and understand and analyze the key takeaways of the EAM's visit to the United States.
But it's certainly a very important visit. He is the first cabinet minister to travel to the US after this COVID problem had started. It's a very important visit. If you look at the meetings that he has had, he's met the entire top brass of the US in this very short visit. He has met, for example, the secretaries of state and defense. He has met the trade representative. He's met the head of the national intelligence. So he's meeting a whole range of people, ranging from security matters to trade. So clearly all these issues are on the agenda for him to discuss with the US. This is in fact his second meeting he's had with the Secretary of State. Now, our relations with the US obviously are at a very strong point right now. I don't think they have been ever been better. But there are some niggling issues that need to be sorted out. And I think it's probably these issues that he's discussing over there. One, of course, is the most emergent issue, which is the issue of COVID vaccines, the issue that we have raised of the patents waiving, in which the US is supporting us. But there are a lot of these technical issues that need to be resolved before we can ever go to the WTO and seek a waiver of patents there. So all these issues put together make this visit extremely important, apart from, of course, the geopolitical situation where you have in Afghanistan, you have the impending withdrawal of the US troops, which will immediately impact our relations, the security situation in Afghanistan and how it impacts us and the region. So I think all these are on the agenda, and we have to see as we go along and get more reports of what's happening, that we can look at and understand the takeaways from this visit.
Professor, let me bring you in now. One of the main reasons for the EAM's visit to the US was touted to be securing vaccines for India, especially from the American companies, that is Moderna, Pfizer, and Johnson & Johnson. But somehow there seems to be a lot of technical hurdles in the way that need to be addressed. Pfizer, I think it was, who wanted to give India supply 5 crore vaccines, but that too, they wanted a few waivers in terms of no trials and in terms of some kind of an agreement where they will not be held liable if something happens to Indians who take the vaccine. So the vaccine securement, if you can call it that, how far along the way has that come, and do you think that we can actually get those vaccines here to India?
Frank, my sense is that a lot of this discussion on vaccines in particular is being led by the Indian ambassador to the US. And what perhaps the minister's visit has done is to galvanize some of the momentum that perhaps the ambassador had laid the ground for. Because ultimately, this goes beyond state to state interaction. When private companies are involved, they are looking at a number of other factors than just America trying to help India. Where American state could intervene, they have intervened, in my opinion. They have led a massive effort in helping India over the last few weeks, once the crisis escalated in India, and once America realized that they have to stand by India just as India stood by Americans at a very critical point. So I think Americans have mobilized 500 million is the number is often talked about. But I think there has been a cross-government, cross-private sector and state legislature effort in mobilizing help for India, and that has been well appreciated by India, as the minister said that he appreciates America standing by India at a very critical time. When it comes to vaccines, the only thing I think, at least in the short term, that Americans can do is to deal with, or American government can do, is to deal with the 80 million vaccines that we hear are with the American government, lying waiting to be used, which we are told that American government, Biden administration, has decided to release them. To other countries that are in greater need. And there are some reports about 20 million being offered to India, etc. And I think that's the place where we would see some announcement pretty soon. But the sense is that at the end of it, if you are looking for a long-term solution, then the private sector is where the real momentum is, and where the real energy is being invested. Because at the end of the day, you want production happening in India. You want private companies, American companies, tying up with Indian companies and rapidly manufacturing vaccines which are needed by Indians at a very critical time when India wants to vaccinate as much of its population as fast as possible. So the role of private sector will always remain critical, and then the role in private sector will always take some time. What I think Mr. Jaishankar's visit has done is to underscore that both governments on both sides stand united in their effort to make sure that some of this help comes to India quickly, it comes to India fast, and that private sector also reacts to some of these developments more quickly than perhaps they are doing at the moment. But by and large, what is, I think, interesting at a broader context of the vaccine diplomacy is that so many of the other issues that India is discussing today with America, whether supply chains of the vaccines, whether it is about, what to do with at multilateral platforms like WTO when it comes to TRIPS, and when it comes to intellectual property, it shows that Indians and Americans are increasingly working together, not only when it comes to their bilateral issues, but also on a set of issues which impact multilateral settings, which impact global governance. And I think that's the real story of Indo-US relationship at the moment, the expansion from bilateral to regional and now increasingly to global, where vaccine diplomacy at the moment sits at the very heart of it.
Absolutely. Preeti Uppala, let me bring you in now and take this discussion forward from this perspective. Is this an opportunity for the private sector, both in India and the US as well, to try and build on what we are doing at a G2G level, so that we can build on the ties and take the ties to another level?
I must say, thank you, Mr. Pereira, for having me on your show. It's always a pleasure to be here. Absolutely. I think this is, firstly, it's a very important trip for Ambassador Jaishankar to really cement his position, I think, on the global stage with some of these issues and meet his counterparts face to face post election. But I think more importantly, it is absolutely an opportunity for the private sectors of both nations to come together. And we have seen, certainly in India, but also here in the US, it's the private sector that has come through. They have mobilized and helped the country at a great time in need. And that's where really the connect is. We've seen this happen. Anytime there's really a crisis, it's global companies are actually helping their other nations, and America is no different. You must have heard of this incredible global task force that was set up I think about a month ago when 40 of the top US CEOs came together to set up a specific fund just to help India. And I think it's the first of its kind. And it's the Indian American diaspora here really have played a great role in spreading awareness, in fundraising, in collecting assistance funds, and helping as much as they can. And they've also, taken in the help of their American counterparts and people who just live in in America, and who are so concerned. I mean, I live here in Los Angeles, and everyone that I know is so they love and care about India. And I've never seen, I think, billions of people come together to save a nation in the way that they're doing it for India. So that's a wonderful feeling, obviously. But coming back to your question, I think it is a great opportunity for the private sector to do that. I hope Indian companies will take this initiative forward and realize that American companies want to work with them, they want to hear from them, they care, and this is a time when pluralistic, free market, um, uh, political democracies really need to be having conversations on how to work together in a very, very globalized world. And how do we save ourselves from this pandemic that has gone on for over a year and a half? And how do we get back to a place where we can all just breathe and start, seeing a better tomorrow? So I think that's the point where we are now. There's a lot of positivity out there. And I think obviously the US is the epicenter of innovation and change. And I think India being its greatest ally in the South Asian region, and specifically with the Quad and so on, I think it's a great opportunity for the two nations to come together, not just the administrations, but also the people.
Absolutely, absolutely. All right, taking the discussion forward now, Ambassador. Since the Quad was brought up, does this also mean that we are going to further cement the Quad? The professor was talking about supply chains as well. We saw the supply chain resilience initiative come to the fore too, and that getting some kind of momentum as well. So how important is it for both India and the United States to work together to build resilient supply chains, to look away from China and give some kind of an alternative as well?
Well, yes, this visit should further strengthen our Quad partnership, which is the first time that we have a major multilateral cooperation with the US in the strategic field. You mentioned about supply chains, IPR issues. These were also discussed, because the fact that we had a meeting with the trade representative means that these issues would have been discussed. But as I mentioned earlier, there were these two niggling issues that I think we need to watch out for in our bilateral relations, because they have the potential of blowing up. One of these is the Cairns issue. The Cairn Oil Company has won this bilateral case in arbitration because of retrospective taxation, and has gone to US courts and is trying to impose restrictions on and trying to seize Air India's funds in the US. Now, given the importance that these large multinational companies have in US politics, this particular case is extremely important, and we need to ensure that these do not blow up into issues that can start impacting bilateral relations. And the other important issue is the recent issue of this issue of Twitter and WhatsApp, where there seems to be a confrontation building up between the government in India and these organizations because of the directives that have been coming out. And it's again important that we ensure that these issues are sorted out so that they don't become bilateral issues. Because as I mentioned, that our bilateral issues have so far become almost all major issues have been covered. We don't have major differences, but I see these two as niggling issues that can become a problem.
Absolutely. Professor, let me bring you in now, talking about the strategic arena. What is it that India and the US are working on? The ambassador brought up issues of niggling issues and issues of concern, that of Cairn Oil and the social media giants. What about issues like Afghanistan and other things? Are these issues also extremely important? How have things changed?
Things, I think, Frank, are rapidly evolving in various geographies. In particular, I think in India's neighborhood, and that was what we have learned is that regional issues were part of the agenda as far as foreign minister's visit to the US was concerned, where Afghanistan and Myanmar in particular were discussed. And I think those two issues remain very critical, both from India's point of view as well as from American foreign policy perspective, where on the one hand, American establishment, there is a consensus about withdrawing troops, limiting their footprint in Afghanistan, military footprint in Afghanistan. On the other, there is a human rights push as far as the military junta in Myanmar is concerned, and the taking over of government there, the military coup. So I think, it is quite evident that there are some differences as far as India and New Delhi and Washington are concerned. They look at these two issues through slightly different prisms. It's not a strategic divergence, but certainly a tactical one at the moment, which has the potential to become strategic if not resolved. Because at the end of the day, Afghanistan is a very important part of India's periphery, and India would like to see a stable, secure Afghanistan where entities like Taliban do not become the sole arbiter of politics. And I think American withdrawal seems to be a problem in that sense, because we know Taliban are gaining ground. We know that there is little appetite in America, in the West in general, to sustain their presence. And so at some point, for Washington and New Delhi, it is important to come to terms with this reality and see how they can work together. We are seeing some movement on that front, some issues of American military presence in what form it will be there being discussed, and what kind of a role India can play. Biden administration has certainly brought India back to the negotiating table, so that's a good development in that context. On Myanmar, of course, there is a different set of priorities for India and Washington. So if you are looking at it from an India's neighborhood perspective, there are challenges that the two nations are facing. But I think my point is that there have always been challenges. That India and the US has never had a perfect partnership, and no relationship is perfect. But if you look at India and the US, there have always been difficulties in terms of operationalizing the larger vision of two democracies working together. What has been interesting is that the arc of Indo-US relationship has really bent towards greater convergence. And that's, I think, very, very significant from a number of perspectives for various reasons, especially for the Indo-Pacific, where, as we have been discussing, Quad has become such an interesting development, which is being talked about a lot, and there is a sense of reassurance that for all the talk about Quad, it is continuing to exist, and countries are taking it forward with a degree of seriousness that perhaps they were not doing before. So we are looking at developments. If you're looking at the long-term development of Indo-US relationship, you do feel that there is a certain arc there. There is a certain movement in a positive trajectory, which will continue irrespective of the differences that we may have. But clearly, as the ambassador was pointing out, some of the challenges, because they are, they have the potential to involve multiple stakeholders, can actually become, the rallying point for a number of those who may not have that big a stake in the relationship. So that is the challenge that both Washington and New Delhi face at this point. But I think what is happening is that, given the challenge of the pandemic at the moment, and given that the energies of the two administrations are really focused on getting out of this pandemic into a more sort of economically robust posture, for the foreseeable future, we may just see the two nations, the two administrations, the two countries working perhaps more cohesively together to come out of the present crisis and leave some of these differences aside to be resolved at a time perhaps when there is a larger stability in their environment and in their economic health.
Absolutely. Priti Upala, let me take a point that the professor was making forward with you as well. He was talking about the Biden administration, and let's compare that with the Trump administration and talk about how things have changed. Have things changed really? Have they changed for the better under the Biden administration? And what does it mean for the ties between India and the United States going forward?
A great question, Mr. Pereira. I remember very clearly during the election period, there were a lot of members of our Indian American diaspora over here who were a little bit hesitant of a potential Biden administration, especially with regards to foreign policy and so on. Just the way that the Democratic Party has always, thought about these issues. and geopolitics, because obviously it has huge ramifications on the Indo-US relationship. And there was a little hesitancy there. I think they maybe liked what they were hearing from the Republican side. But the election is over now, and America has spoken, so to speak. And I must say, I'm very pleasantly surprised. I've been keeping a close watch on policy since the president has taken his oath. And I think specifically, ironically, in the area of foreign policy is the greatest pleasant surprises, let's say, for India. I'm extremely pleased that this administration has understood the importance of India within the whole Afghan puzzle, and they have brought India back to the negotiation table. There's the famous saying, if you don't have a seat at the high table, then you're probably on the menu. I think we've been on the menu for a long time, and now it's great to finally see us, with 5 or 6 other countries really looking at the possible exit of the US troops in Afghanistan. And I think we actually play a very important role. And it's good that, both governments can acknowledge that. And I think India will find its right role of action when those troops do slowly phase out. So that's been great. But I think I must say, during this pandemic, the US, this administration has really gone over and above its call of duty to assist its strategic partner in India. It's not just a number, the 500 million that gets touted. I think just the general sentiment here of not just American people, but also several congressmen from both parties. I think India is enjoying a lot of bipartisan support right now, and there is a general concern in Congress. What can they do to help India? And the stockpile of 80 million doses, I think there will be a chunk of that will go towards helping India, and I think this administration will do everything that it can to facilitate that. I'm extremely happy to hear this. I think the oldest democracy in the world and the greatest democracy in the world should be working very closely together to bring about a better world. And we say these things in it's always philosophical and beautiful, but I actually see it manifesting in true form right now. So that's a wonderful thing. As a proud Indian American who lives here and is very much involved in politics and media, I think it's great to see India have such a important place in the minds and hearts of the political elite here in America, and they know that what India's role vis-a-vis China has been, and always will be, and I think that is not lost on them. The Quad is an incredibly important structure. I think this administration is finally understanding that. Secretary Blinken and even Secretary Austin have more than one occasion stressed that point. And I think they are working very closely with Dr. Jayashankar to make sure, I guess, come up with the best solution on how these great countries can come together to bring about peace in that region, which is turning out to be very pivotal in the scope of world peace. So I have only very, very positive hopes for the two countries moving forward.
Absolutely. And talking about moving forward, it's time to get quick closing comments from all my panelists with the best way forward. And we look at the long-term development of the ties between India and the United States, starting first with you, Ambassador.
Well, as I think all the panelists agree that our relations today are extremely strong, and one of the best things that's happened with the change in government in the US has been that the India policy has become bipartisan, and it's clearly that despite all the polarization that there is in that country, on India there's been a smooth transition from the previous government to the present one, and that's an extremely good thing from our point of view, and we should really build on it. Afghanistan has been mentioned. I think it's very important for India to reaffirm to the US that withdrawing militarily should not mean withdrawing support to the government, that should continue, and we should work together to support the legitimate government of Afghanistan, stay in power, and maintain law and order and peace in the country, and also add to regional security. So all these, our two worldviews have never been more similar in our entire history over the last 70 years. we agree on all major international issues. And it's a very good thing that even on issues like IPR, which has always been a controversial issue in our bilateral relations, we are in agreement now. So all these areas put together project a very good future for our bilateral relations. But as I said, we must remember that there are issues that can possibly derail relations because there are forces in both countries. There are all kinds of other factors. So it's important that there be high-level contact and all these issues be discussed as they are being discussed now to ensure that our relations continue on the current trajectory, which is important for the US and is certainly extremely important for us.
Absolutely. Professor?
Yeah, I think I would agree with Ambassador Sinha on most of the points that he has mentioned. And I think what perhaps the visit has done is to underscore from India's side the importance of this engagement and the fact that Dr. Jaishankar had to go, decided to make this visit in person at the end of the day, which seemed, very important from India's point of view, given that this is the first high-level visit to the new administration. And what we have seen in this, in the Indo-US context is that different governments have come, different administrations have come, but the trajectory has been positive. We have been, with every administration from Obama to Trump to Biden now, we have been worried about certain things, but in the end it turned out to be all right. So my sense is that so long as the larger strategic convergence continues, India and the US perhaps are in a position today where they can manage their more tactical differences in a way that does not jeopardize the larger flow of the relationship. And one can hope that the present crisis, this COVID-19 crisis, perhaps gives a boost, further boost to this relationship, because it brings in several other elements in in a relationship. Who would have thought that supply chains and IPR protection, India and US would be discussing this, 2 years back. In this atmosphere and with such a great degree of convergence. So what is interesting is that how this relationship has been sustained by successive governments, both in India and the US, and the fact that this is also a bottom-up relationship. I think, as PT was pointing out, this is not a relationship simply being driven by governments. People are invested in this relationship, and it makes a difference at the end of the day when you have the people of the two countries who feel so strongly about it. When America was in crisis last year, India was feeling it, and there were many in India, and Indian government stood up and supported America. Similarly, India is in crisis, and Americans have rallied behind India. So I think that's a great, this is emblematic of the larger trajectory of the relationship. So one hopes that the present trend continues, and the governments of the, on the two sides continue to interact at the highest levels.
Absolutely. And Preeti Upala, close the show for us with your quick concluding remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Pereira. I've always said that the most important relationship in the second half of the century is going to be between America and India. Governments come and go, but I think the long-term strategic defense, and most importantly, I think the human connection between these two countries cannot be denied. I think for a better world, we do need the two countries coming together. And with rogue elements out there, I think our only hope is if both America and India step up. Living here as an Indian American, it's great to see so much convergence. And I never thought that I would say this, but this global pandemic has actually brought the whole world together. We really are a global village now, and people are forced to look after each other, and nations are forced to care about each other, just because if your neighbor is sick, you're probably going to catch it too. And we can see this in our own region back in the subcontinent area as well. But it's a wonderful to see America and India getting closer. This is, I think, the closest I've seen them diplomatically, and both administrations working very, very hard. Fantastic opportunity for Dr. Jaishankar to really, show this administration what our great nation can do and how these great countries can work together. So extremely positive, very keenly watching to see the drama unfold. Every moment is exciting, but I think we're all just very grateful to be alive and present at this time. And I just wish both administrations the best of luck, and I wish everyone keep safe and stay strong.
Absolutely. All right. We'll have to leave it at that. Thank you so much to all my panelists for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective for us. What's coming out of this discussion is that ties between India and the United States have never been stronger. There were concerns every time governments changed in either country, but the relationship has sustained and grown from strength to strength. India now enjoys bipartisan support in the United States, which is a very positive development. The world view of New Delhi and Washington, D.C. hasn't been so close ever, and we are in agreement on almost all major international issues. This is also a major opportunity for the private sector to build on the G2G ties and take business partnership forward as well. As perfect as this partnership seems, though, at the moment, there are some niggling issues that need to be addressed. If not, the gains can just vanish. For that, we need to continue our high-level contact and ensure non-state actors are dealt with early on. Well, once again, thank you for your continued support. For those of you who haven't already subscribed, please like the video, subscribe, hit the bell icon, and then all notifications. Do follow our social media handles for all the latest updates, and you can also subscribe to our newsletter to get some incisive content. The Bharat First team runs a daily Big Picture quiz. Please do participate by going through the description in Big Picture videos. Here are the UPI IDs for those of you who would like to come forward and contribute. A small contribution you make will be a giant leap for us to keep bringing you this content. So do continue to show your love and support. All the information, along with a few more must-see recommendations, are in the description of this video. Please go through it. That's it from me. See you again next time.